Well, let me begin by saying jobs is my number one priority, along with public safety, so that there's no confusion there. But as I sit here and I look through the audience and everyone who's here, I see a lot of the doers in this community. And what's going through my mind as I was listening to Paul is, yes, it's important to have vision, and I think that's part of what the city has to provide, what I have to provide as mayor. But I also think when you talk about community, it really is organic. And my advice is just do it. It's like the Nike commercial, just do it. Because some of the successes I'm most proud of in this community come from the community itself. And I think people don't realize it. I see Howard Snyder back there, and we have had an incredible turnaround in this community because 8 years ago, the city announced it was going to close the Villard Avenue Library. And the community was up in arms because it was going to be closed down. And Howard and others had some very creative thinking and allowed us to come back to the community. And a week ago Saturday, we had the grand opening of the new Villard Square Library, something that I'm sure in that neighborhood most people thought would never occur. But it literally came out of the community. The work we've done on sustainable Milwaukee, the green team, that was all driven by people from our community. And I still remember the meeting with Julie Kohler when she walked in my office and said, this is something we should do. We should make the city more sustainable. And I felt like I was in a tennis match. And I thought, okay, Julie, I'll hit that tennis ball right back to you. And I said, okay, put together a group of people. Let's put this together and let's come up with a plan. And much to my shock, she did. So you should know that's one of the things, because there's no shortage of people coming in with great ideas. Here, you should do this, you should do this. But the reality is, it is a partnership. And to have communities that want to work with us, that's very, very important. I will say this because I think this is important as well, because money obviously is an issue. And I'll just tell you a quick story. A couple years ago, I took my two younger daughters, they were probably 7 and 9 at the time, to their first ever Brewers game. They'd never been to a Brewers game. And our seats are in the nosebleed section, in the 400 section. But I had to make a presentation on the field that day to the Brewers for something they had done good for the community. And as I was walking off the field, one of the representatives of the Brewers said to me, hey, Mark Attanasio isn't going to be here today. Do you want to sit in his seats? Which are the 4 front row seats right next to the dugout. I mean, right next to the dugout. And I go through my mind, okay, am I going to get in trouble? And I thought, oh, wait, if I speak at an event, I can take something of value. So I reported it ethically, just so you know. So we sat down, and there's 2 things from this. One, I ruined my daughter's lives because they thought, well, this is where you always sit when you go to the Brewers game. But second, the ball boys were right in front of us, like a foot and a half away from me. And then I don't know how many of you have ever experienced this, but when you're that close to the ball boys, you can see what happens to them. And throughout the game, people were always begging for balls. And every inning or two, they'd take a ball and they'd throw it up into the stands. Everybody, it's like watching fish and stuff like that gather. And about the 8th inning, I leaned over them and I said, now you know what it's like to be mayor. And these guys are 19 and 20, and they look at me like I'm crazy. And I said, every time you make someone happy by throwing them a ball, you make 100 people angry with you. And really, that's what happens a lot, because as we make our decisions as to where we're going to be involved, we can't do everything. And so we do pick winners, and we do pick losers. And so for me, the question I'm always asking is, are you bringing me jobs? It goes back to, are you bringing me jobs? Then we're going to talk money. Are you bringing me jobs? But most of the energy, and we can talk as we go through about other places that I have seen, has truly come from the community. And do not ever underestimate that power.
I want to pick up on something you said, Mayor. You're talking about picking winners and losers. We have a lot of different neighborhoods in this community, in this city. How do we decide where to focus our energies and efforts? Are we inherently picking winners and losers? Do we simply say some neighborhoods are in better shape and are easier to stabilize or save? How do we do that? What's the determination?
But we have not had to do that here. There are some communities, I think Detroit's an example, where they have a deliberate policy where they've decided that there are some neighborhoods they are going to save, and there's some that are going to not let go, but they're not going to invest as much. We haven't done that now, and some of that obviously is there are different funding pots, if you will. The community development block grant money necessitates that it goes into the areas with the greatest need. But the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative doesn't necessarily include that lowest economic denominator, but there's the issue of, can we invest in these neighborhoods, leveraging it, and this is where the partnerships come in, leveraging it with the foundation community and the private sector so that a neighborhood does not have that tip. And there are some that would say, we shouldn't invest in those neighborhoods. I disagree. I think we should invest in those neighborhoods. Then you get to other parts of the city where we come in for TIF requests. Do you need a TIF request, for example, on North Avenue over on the east side? And probably economically you don't. That is an area that's going to generate its own demand. That doesn't mean people are stopping to ask for TIFs there, but you have to make those decisions. So I would say we have made a very strong effort, and this might get to Rob's point, of with limited resources, should we be cutting people off? We have not come to that point. That doesn't mean that at some time we wouldn't come to that point, but I don't see it in the foreseeable future, and I hope it doesn't come to that. But Rob is right when he says with limited resources, you do try to maintain those that you have if they've been doing a good job. You don't want to throw someone out of the light bulb.
Nelson and Sharon, why do some of these efforts in neighborhoods work? Why do some of them not work? What's the difference based on your experiences in the kind of work you do? Sharon, we'll start with you. Just grab that microphone there, please.
Well, I think in part, I can speak from my experience, and I think a part of it is framing the issue around scarcity. And I hear a dynamic going on here. You know, if you believe that your neighborhood is not worthy, it will perform as if it is not worthy. If you believe as a city that we have to make choices between some populations and others, then others won't receive. So I absolutely believe at heart that a community that I said was rated the third in the nation, that when I moved back here from New York, there was a publication that identified it as the worst neighborhood to visit, has changed because the community did not believe that it was the worst neighborhood in the city. The community members would not accept that they lived in scarcity, although someone else had rated them the third in the nation. And how did we do this? I don't want to glow over the notion of impactful collective change. I look at my partners in this room that have given their time, their talent, and their money because we co-created a vision and a way of doing it. And I think that those are the neighborhoods that succeed. And unfortunately, to our chagrin, the neighborhoods that are not succeeding have not created the will and the partnerships to move collaboratively forward.
And when you say partners, Sharon, describe for us the partners.
Well, I could just ask you to raise your hand if you're a partner in Lindsay Heights. Raise your hand. Okay. Those partners are corporate, they're foundations, they are doctors, they are health institutions, they are our neighbors. These are our partners, and to talk about them staying with us, co-creating a vision, and then making that vision come to life is what has happened here. So they represent memos of understandings. They represent, I'm just committed and I want to volunteer. They represent relationships with the city of Milwaukee that are dynamic and resourceful. And these are our partners. And without this collaboration, we would not be standing where we are now.
Nelson, I'll have you offer a couple of thoughts on this.
Sure, I do agree with Sharon's idea of having a heart, but you also need to have some base. I think for a partnership to be effective, you need to have 3 R's. You need to be resilient, you need to be relentless, and you need to be willing to take risk. And if you're not had that recipe as any type in any partnership, you're bound to fail, especially when you don't have that resiliency part. I think also when we look at the neighborhoods, we also got to understand what are the strengths, and I think it was said before, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We can't ignore that. Not everybody is good at everything. We should focus on things that people are excelling at and figure out how to partner, sharing resources with the things that we're good at. But we cannot fall into the fallacy where we're going to be able to help everybody because the mix is different. The needs are different. And we need to be conscious, and that should be our base for developing any partnership or strategy.
I want to get the perspective of Julia and Gary on this, and I don't want to be the guy, the bad news guy in the room, but let me ask a very fundamental question. We talk about what can be done in neighborhoods, but ultimately isn't this a jobs discussion? Are you going to have healthy neighborhoods if neighborhoods don't have a lot of employment opportunities, if people are not working? And how does business make the decision where to invest and where not to invest? So let me put it in two parts. And I'll start with you, Gary, on this. I mean, isn't it about jobs? And then also, people in this room probably want to know, how do you make decisions on where you're going to do business and whether you're going to invest in a neighborhood?
It's all about jobs. As I said in my opening comments, if we can put more people to work in this community, raise the salaries and the income level of the neighborhoods, it's going to be a lot easier to solve some of the problems in the neighborhoods. The city of Milwaukee, traditionally, and let's go way back almost to our origin, because we're a very young city the way we run it. We were a socialistic government for a long time. The government didn't trust the people didn't trust, and business didn't trust the people who were in power. We went through 2 mayors in how many years, Mike? 40 years or something like that, who didn't change that. Finally, we got a mayor in John Norquist who came in and he changed it. He said, we're going to trust business and the developers to work to create jobs. They laid out some basic tenets of their government at the time. Get out of the way of business, reduce their cost of business, bring the permit center together and the developers, work collaboratively, hold down taxes, play a role in marketing, develop what the city could do, but let the private sector lead the way in development. That happened. It was continued on after John left under Tom, under Mayor Barrett. But times have changed a little bit. We got the national financial situation. We got the banks, very hard to get financing right now. And it all results in people like, right now, DCD is about half the size it was 8 years ago. People don't know that. The public sector can't do as much as we expected to them at the time. But it also, the gap has widened a little bit between the developers and the city, I think, and the development community. And as I talked to the developers, they said, can we talk about it in this forum? I said, that's the place to do it. Can't blame the city, can't blame the developers, because it's a different time and a different situation right now. But what's happening, Mike, and I think that Julie will agree, businesses make decisions. It used to be based on cost. It's cheaper to have land in Franklin and build out there. It's cheaper to have land maybe up in Menominee Falls and build. Cheaper to have land in Glendale and build. And I just described the 3 fastest growing companies in town, in Northwestern Mutual and Johnson Controls and Kohl's. But they're starting to come back to the basic of where they got to be located is where the people are and where they can get qualified, diverse workforce. Jeff Jarris, when we were able to bring Manpower downtown, is a very enlightened company that he said, I want to be where I have a diverse workforce. He brought their company downtown. He's a salesman right now. He said his employees have a spring in their step that they never would have had if they built out in the suburbs somewhere. So now you're starting to locate jobs in the community where you can get to them with our very, call it limited transportation system, which is absolutely a real problem we have in this community. And don't want to get off on that, I'll talk for an hour. But what we need to do is to sell these companies that if they want qualified workers and innovative people, they're going to be downtown. That's what built Manpower, and that's what will start to build these companies again. You cannot get people, diversity in Menominee Falls. You cannot get it in Franklin. You can probably get it in Glendale. But that's why these guys should bring their company, and women should bring their companies downtown. You go into a Kohl's store, just tell them what a great place it is to have your company downtown. I don't think that decision's made yet. You can read about a lot of stuff out there, but hope is still hanging on that one. Think what that'd do to our community. They should be downtown because of the people and the diversity in downtown.
And if they're downtown, you believe it follows that neighborhoods that surround downtown will benefit from that?
Tremendously, Mike. You can get to work. How do people right now in the central city get out to the Menominee Falls? Try it. It'd take you 2 days to get out there. I don't know if you can get a bus.
Julia Taylor, you're representing a lot of business people. How do they make their decisions on whether to invest in neighborhoods? And also, you might want to follow up on what Gary had to say,
Sure.
too.
Well, and I think maybe, Gary, we may be saying the same thing. I would use the word talent, that I think the employers go where talent's close by. And I think the ability to create healthy neighborhoods that are attractive, particularly to young talent, and help us grow our own young talent in those neighborhoods is probably one of the best things we can do. You know, when we look at this region and this city, we have a small marketplace. We're not going to have companies coming here because there's a big consumer market here to sell to. We may have a great loyal fan base for the brewers, but we're still a small market. When you look at cheap materials or cheap labor, this isn't the place you come to. But when you look for creativity, innovation, and great talent in your workforce, this is where you come. So we have to continue to grow that. And you can't grow it just simply through initiatives like Milwaukee Succeeds. Part of Milwaukee succeeding will be having healthy neighborhoods. Also, when you look at employers, they want to go to neighborhoods that are safe. They want to go to neighborhoods that they know that they can, one, find the talent will stay in and will grow in. And I think they're often willing to make investments in those neighborhoods. I think part of the problem is that we do this a little pell-mell now. It's where it happens, you know, and if Gary can talk manpower into coming downtown, all of a sudden we have an impact in that neighborhood around that. Well, how do we think through that more? And I think we have a lot of key pieces in place, like the Zilber Initiative, making investments in neighborhoods. What we have to do then is link up more where some of these opportunities are as we're looking at both relocation and growth. And I think it will take time. I always talk about the 20-year overnight success story that we'll point to, whether it's the Third Ward or, you know, Martin Luther King Drive or whatever that's gone on. It takes time, and it takes a real vision, and it takes dedicated people on the ground. I also think it's more than just money. It's more than just a company locating somewhere with jobs. It's a little bit like Stone Soup. Everybody's got to bring something that gets put in that soup that causes that soup to have that richness of the neighborhood and to make it sustainable. You know, I think it's always a mistake to say that a company moving into a neighborhood is going to save that neighborhood. The neighborhood has to work with the company to save the neighborhood.
Rob Henkin, there were some people in the focus groups that Chris Boston conducted who felt that there might have to be public policy changes in order to help with our community development efforts. Do you agree with that? Could you suggest any that might be relevant to this discussion?
Well, I think, let me answer that by going back to the issue of jobs again, because that's what we've been talking a lot about. And I think the first question is, what is the role of government in terms of jobs? And I think there are very few among us who would suggest that the role of government is to directly be a job creator. In my mind, the role of government is to create the types of conditions within the relevant jurisdiction in which job growth ostensibly can and will occur. So when we talk about public policies, or assuming then that the jobs are key to improving the condition of neighborhoods, and we talk about public policies, I think we're really reaching a crossroads here in Southeast Wisconsin and really throughout the entire state. We have a situation where the cost of government there are several fixed costs that are growing on an annual basis, and the revenue stream simply can't keep pace. And so what is that going to mean in terms of the ability of Mayor Barrett to ensure that potholes are being filled and that there's adequate levels of police and fire services, et cetera. When I look at public policies, I look at first and foremost the need to put more authority in the hands of local elected officials officials to determine for themselves what their correct revenue mix ought to be. The Public Policy Forum has looked at cities throughout the country, and Milwaukee is extremely unique in that we are essentially funding our city government from shared revenue from the state of Wisconsin and from the property tax. In other cities, there are several other alternatives that are typically in play, from hotel, motel taxes, which here go to the convention center district, to sales taxes, et cetera. We need to place greater authority in the hands of local leaders to determine what they're going to need to make sure that the conditions are there to ensure job growth, number one. And I think that does go hand in hand somewhat with some of the flexibility that has now been provided by state government to local leaders to have a greater say on their own as to what the proper level of public sector pay and benefits ought to be. We need more flexibility now on the other side, on the revenue side.